share of it. Okay, bunch of things to get to. First of all, new people, raise your hands. It's really great to have you here. Everybody new. Everybody new. Yes, thank you. Welcome to everyone new. Everybody who's experienced coming to, I would say old, but I don't want to say old. Everyone seasoned at these parties, please say hi to new people. It's really, really important to make new people feel welcome because we need everybody here. So introduce yourself, say hi, say welcome. It's really great to have every new face here and every seasoned face here too. Okay, so I'm going to move. I have to move fast. Debbie is coming, right? Congresswoman Dingell is coming. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. Great. So we have to move fast to get all kinds of stuff packed in before her. Our state senator Jeff Irwin is back there. You want to come up and say a few words?
Can't miss an opportunity.
Hey, Jeff. Just a couple sentences. Come in a couple minutes, okay? All right.
Can't miss an opportunity to talk to my Washtenaw Dems. Great to see so many of you this morning. Quick update on what's happening in Lansing. Just a couple things. One, the most important thing happening right now is we're working on the state budget. The Senate Democrats have just started reporting our subcommittee budgets out. And a couple of things that I'm really excited about is one, K-12 schools are the most important thing we do as a state. It's an incredibly successful and important enterprise to the future prosperity of our people. And we said Dems are putting a real priority on that by putting another $1 billion into public education, and an additional $400 per pupil, extra investments in CTE, big extra investments in at-risk schools and special education, and obviously keeping a watchful eye towards what's happening in Washington, D.C., because about 11% of the money we spend on education in Michigan comes from the federal government. The other big thing that's going on in Lansing, besides the budget and all the serious work, is that our Republican colleagues in the House are not doing serious work. Just this week, they passed a Michigan version of the SAVE Act, so a Michigan version of an act that is meant to suppress the votes of valid Michigan voters. And one of the things I want to say about that, because you've all heard about it, I know you're active, engaged Democrats, you've heard about how this can prevent people from voting, how it could even prevent, women who've changed their name to their marriage from voting. But what I want to just point out is, I think a big goal of this is just to gum up the process, just to make it harder to vote. And if you've noticed, there are some communities that tend to vote Republican, where you can walk right in and vote easily. But in communities where there are people, where there's more crowded precincts, that's where we see the lines. And if you create an argument at the front of the line for every second or third voter, that's going to make long lines even longer. And that means people are going to have to go to work. People are going to have to go get their kids, and they're going to leave that line. And those kinds of people are the kinds of people we need to help us in this fight that we're in for the future of our democracy. The final thing I'll say is that while Republicans are on their BS doing stuff about, trying to prevent valid voters, trying to pass resolutions that are just anti-immigrant and frankly disgusting for someone who believes that immigrants are an important fabric of our country, Senate Democrats are trying to do important work to help people here in the state of Michigan. So just recently we passed something that will hopefully lower prescription drug prices here in Michigan. We know that prescription drug prices are a huge pain point for a lot of people. We hear all the time about people who are cutting pills in half to make their prescription last longer, or going without treatment in ways that immiserate them and then ultimately land them in the emergency room, costing us all more. It's a terrible system that we have here in these United States, and prescription drug prices and the increase in those prices are a major pain point. In fact, we heard from insurance companies that prescription drug price increases are the #1 things driving our premiums up. So what we did is we passed a prescription drug affordability board. This is a small part of a lot of solutions that we need to employ to try to drive success on this issue. And what this board will do, if we can get it passed, is they will identify the most common drugs, the most heavily used drugs, and the drugs that we believe there may be price fixing or price gouging or just unreasonable pricing. And in those cases, set a maximum price for those drugs in the state of Michigan. So, this is something that a couple of states have done before us. They've so far had success in the courts setting this maximum limit for drugs. And if we can take on the most abusive drug pricing here in Michigan. I think that's a good thing we can do for people. So that's just a little bit about what's happening really recently in Lansing. And I'm always excited to see so many Democrats here engaged in what we need to do, not just to spread these types of messages about how we can make our communities better, but also get ready for what's hopefully going to happen next fall, because we need to keep trying to make, if we want our democracy to continue, we need to keep working. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Joe. I'm sorry, I haven't said hi to everybody online. How everybody in the Zoom room? We're very happy you're here. And anybody new in the Zoom room, we're super happy you're here. I wish I could tell your Zoom friends to say hi to you, welcome you, our seasoned Zoom friends. But in any case, I guess you can in chat. So welcome. We're glad you're here. All right, quickly, just speaking of senators, we have a candidate for the U.S. Senate in the room, Abdul El-Sayed. Feel free to, talk to Abdul, find out what he's all about. Welcome. We're very happy to have you here. Other electeds in the room, just would you quick raise your hands? There's a lot of people. Thank you, Annie and Sadaf. And I'm sorry, forget your name. Matthew. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Other electeds in the room? All right, great. Welcome and thank you for doing all the work that you do, because we know that it's typically thankless. And speaking of being thankless, the County Board of Commissioners has a lot on its plate that it often doesn't get any recognition for doing. Annie, you want to come up real quick and you can talk about the County Board, but also I want to talk about supporting some of the organizations that are being savaged by this administration. We all know that with the cuts coming from the federal government, I think it's 40% of the Michigan state budget. Is that right, Jeff? 42% of the Michigan state budget is federal funds. So as those funds start to get pinched and dried up, we need to step up. And so Annie has some suggestions for how most effectively to do that here.
Well, thank you. I think Chair Scott is on her way, so I don't want to get in case she wants to speak. But I do want to highlight, you might have seen an announcement from us this week that we retained legal counsel to fight the order to hand over Washtenaw ID information. So there's been a lot of advocacy efforts around that. And we're working pretty closely with folks that are doing work on the ground with neighbors in our community who are undocumented. The other thing that I'll mention, on Wednesday, we have an item on our agenda to allocate emergency dollars from the older adults millage directly to support food pantry access for older adults, as well as replenish the SKIP program. And so the SKIP program that we have at the county is similar to, it's basically barrier busters, but focus on emergency support for older adults. And so those are two items that we thought were something that we could get done really quickly before we approve the rest of the funding that for the first year of the senior millage. The one thing that I've been encouraging folks at our executive board meetings is to encourage everyone here and neighbors to support the organizations in our community that are doing on the ground work, both with things like food access, but also immigration related. So in Washtenaw County, I think most people might be, but if you're not, Food Gatherers is like the main hub for all of our food pantries across the county. So they're dealing with a lot right now with USDA cuts. They're already feeling the impacts of that. And so I created a document, and there's just 3 organizations listed right now. We'll be adding more, especially in the housing and homelessness space, because I think what we're all predicting is that there will be HUD cuts that are going to impact our local shelter organizations. Food Gatherers is listed, and then there's also a link where you can look at all of their community partners. And so if you're familiar with a food pantry in your community and you can either give directly to them, or you can help support Food Gatherers, because they are able to buy bulk and they work directly with the food pantries to make that easier. And then the most important things right now, I think, to highlight for those unfamiliar, the Washtenaw Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Rights, they do a lot of immediate on the ground response for people. And then MERC is the Michigan Immigrants' Rights Center. They have faced a lot of cuts. They've had to lay off about 70 employees already. And so I know we're all getting a lot of emails to donate to current federal elected officials. And, that's great. But if you have an extra $20 or $30 in your budget every month, it might be worth considering how you can help local organizations helping people on the ground. I think it's really important right now. So that's my pitch. Oh, and Chair Scott's here. Hey.
Good morning.
Morning.
I don't know what you said.
I informed them that there are organizations doing great work on the ground that I should be supporting, and then also that we have the emergency funding for pantry support and the SKIP program. And then I also mentioned that we have retained legal counsel to fight the Washington ID request.
We have retained really great.
Legal counsel. Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell.
Oh, yeah, Congresswoman.
They came through on Zoom.
Oh, on the Zoom. I'm generally pretty loud. I'm surprised.
Oh, and we both got the Birkenstocks on today.
Yeah.
Shirt on too.
We have a really great law firm. Oh, look, and this is just, Annie just said it and I said it. Thanks to Congresswoman Dingell. She really helped secure a fantastic law firm based out of DC that's doing a lot of work to help kind of thwart the agenda of the Trump administration. So I'm thrilled every time I get worried. I think we have some really strong people fighting behind us. And if you look to see who their clients are in the past, it's things like representing Bill Clinton in his impeachment trial. So these are the people, and I feel pretty strong about how helpful they're going to be to us in the fight we have about the county ID program.
First round of Perkins Coie yesterday.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, okay. They won the first round of Perkins Coie yesterday. So these are the people and we got them. And the exciting thing is that they have so many people looking to take their cases right now that they review cases in an executive council. They reviewed this county ID case. They felt like it was a good case. They felt like they had a chance to win. And for that reason, they took the case. So, okay, that's it. Thank you.
Hi. Especially for you new folks, in case you don't know, people say Katie's here. That's Katie Scott, who is the chair of our County Board of Commissioners. All right. And eager to chat with you at any time. Very, very hardworking board. I know Congresswoman Dingell's here, but I know Eric has to leave in 10, no later. So pop up and make it as fast as you can. And I don't want to rush you because it's really important, but just give us a high level. So we've been talking for some time about contesting every race. This is how Republicans took over counties and municipalities starting 30 years ago. They started contesting every race, every single race. And we don't do that in Washtenaw County, we Democrats. We have a lot of races we could win that we never put up a Democratic candidate. So Eric's a Mass Municipal Clerk and is a Lodi Township official and has been working on this for some time. And so he's going to give us a high level right now, and then more will be in the newsletter, okay?
Okay, great. So first off, if you live in Dexter School District or Pittsfield Township, you have an election this Tuesday. Be sure to vote. Polls are open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Also this year, 4 cities in Washtenaw County elect their local officials. Those are Milan, Saline, Manchester, and Chelsea. Still coming up, July 22nd is the filing deadline for 3 of those cities, Saline, Manchester, and Chelsea. And so that information is on the board here. If you'd like to consider running, now is the time to be talking with your friends about that. Now is the time to be collecting signatures. All 3 of those cities require you to collect some signatures. So if that's something you do want to pursue, talk to your local city clerk's office. They'll have the forms that you need to fill out, and you can be on the ballot this year. Also, pay attention to these races locally. If you live in these cities, make sure to save the date. In August, there is a primary for Milan, and then the first Tuesday in November, all these local officials will be on the ballot. It's important for Dems to contest all these races, and leading into 26, we'll have a whole list that we'll keep updated with all the positions that are going to be on the ballot. So if you're considering running for office, now's a great time to be looking into getting more involved in Washtenaw Dems. Getting more involved in local community service. And another great way is there are loads of appointed boards for the county and for local governments. So if you are considering maybe running for office, you should think about, how do I build a resume in public service, and that might include applying and being a part of one of these many appointed boards, either for your local municipality or for the county government. I'm sure our county officials can also chat with you about that if you're interested and give you timelines with that. Thanks.
That was fantastic. Thank you. And we'll put stuff in the newsletter. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, do it. We only send it once a month. Once in a while, we'll send something additional if there's something urgent that we haven't gotten in the newsletter. I'm sorry. Sweet. Yeah. Boy, the comms seem to be really happy if it was once a month, but we only send it once a week. And it's just got all the information in it that you need to participate in the party and different events going on around protests, primarily at this point, going on around the county. So you go to our website. It's the first tab, get involved. Sign up for the newsletter. So do that. Congresswoman Dingell, want to come up? While the Congresswoman is making her way up here, I will note that Kate from the governor's office has passed out postcards, and there are some out there on the table too. They're blank. The governor and Leuna is organizing a drive to get postcards to members of the state legislature about the damage that citizens have suffered from bad roads. Okay, so all you do is on the whatever side, the left-hand side of the card, write down what harm you have been caused as a result of bad roads, and then we'll collect them at the table out there. Kate, are you here? Are you still here? Okay, right there. I'm sorry. And then the staff will stamp them and address them and get them to the right people. Okay. All right. Our wonderful Congresswoman who never sleeps.
Good morning, everybody. So I don't even know where do I begin? So I want to start on hope. Okay. So you sort of look at everything we're doing, and I've lost count of how many rallies and protests that I've spoken at, and but we can't stop, and we have to keep going. And I just want to give you two examples from last week. On Tuesday, I'm somebody who cares deeply about women's health. I don't know, many of you may not realize that it's how I got started in politics, but not on the choice issue, but on the whole issue of women were not included in federally funded research because we had hormones, even though we've been more than 50% of the population since 1946. So we lobbied it and I started the National Women's Health Resource Center, but Bernadine Healy started the Women's Health Initiative, and women started to be included in disease research. We're still not included the way we should be in drug research. But Bobby Kennedy announced that they were eliminating the Women's Health Initiative last Tuesday. And we organized women across this country. I got every woman member, or some of my other women colleagues and I raised our voices and had women talking about it. And by Friday, when I was giving a speech at Michigan Symposium on Women's Health, Thursday night they announced they were not going to eliminate the Women's Health Initiative. It shows that you can. And I told people to take this as a win on Friday, but trust nothing, and they're going to come back. You know that we've had many of our students at all of the universities and colleges in Michigan have had visas taken. I worked with all of the colleges and universities and wrote a letter demanding answers. Many of my colleagues filed a week or two later, but we got it out within, why are you doing this? What is the reason? And we had gone through and studied it. And not that this is a reason to remove anybody, but not one of the students who lost a visa in Michigan appeared to be in any way connected to the Gaza protests. Now, you have freedom of speech and can protest on Gaza as well. Let me make that clear. But, and one woman from Michigan appears, some of it appears that there's been contact with law enforcement, and one of the women had been a victim of sexual violence. That was her contact. And I couldn't, I'm doing some research, I should maybe not be, but trying to understand it and what happens when that happens, or do they need to leave immediately? Do they have a right of appeal? Where is their due process? Is ICE allowed on campus? We did I've worked with all of the universities and colleges on letters. And not only we did, but I worked with litigation. We had people that filed cases. ACLU filed cases here on 4 students. I call 3 of them mine because 2 of them were from Michigan and 1 of them was from Canton. And those visas were all restored last Friday. Now, it was a good news for the day, and it's a good news for the week, but I don't trust anybody. So we're staying on it. Rashid and I met with ICE on Thursday last week for 2 hours. And all I got with the questions that I raised, I got referred more to call justice on this, call Homeland Security on this. We didn't, and anything else I asked on, we didn't have a privacy release form. So we didn't get a lot of answers, but we're trying to create the relationship so we can help people. But I'm going to tell you, we are in a fight. We can't stop. We got to make our voices heard. We got to bring people together. It's the collective we. Elon Musk is leaving Washington. Goodbye. And I am just working and scared to death every single day. I want to make that clear, but I want to give you hope today. The articles in today's paper and yesterday's, the budget came, I'm going to give you my outrage. There's so many outrages, but his narrow budget, which has no standing period probably anyway. But Republicans are saying that they are not comfortable with the budget and are not comfortable with the DOGE cuts. And they're saying that a lot. Some are putting their names to it. So that gives us hope as we begin to start the reconciliation and the budget process. We're supposed to start Medicaid. Well, we are starting what's called rescission. Does everybody understand what that is? When you go and we passed the budget right before we came home for those 2 weeks, and now we have to go in I call it revision. It's what they do. Reconciliation. Now we have to reconcile, like how are we going to meet those budget targets? So the committee I'm on is the toughest one. They've said they want $880 million taken out of Medicaid. We were supposed to start markup on May 7th. When we got home Thursday night, learned that Republicans were postponing Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce meeting by another week because they're at the airport. I won't give you the names. I stood with 3 Republican members. And I said because reports had started to come out this week that one of the ways they were going to try to meet it was to take states like ours, where I will remind you, it is what I said to them. I said, are you guys really, when you got the Affordable Care Act and Rick Snyder, a Republican governor, expanded it so more people would have access to health care and be taken care of and their medicine paid and be able to, are you guys really going to go along with that and tell your constituents that they're not going to have health care? I know you have a heart. I just know you're not going to go along with that. And I do think that, they didn't know what to say. But one of them's a very good Christian. And I said, remember God said when I was sick, I was a little thick, but, they don't, and so somebody else came over to us and, well, I guess so Bob Blatt is on the committee with me and said, what are you going to do? Do you have, and he goes, we don't have a bill. We don't know what we're doing. So that was Thursday afternoon, and Thursday night they postponed for a week. And that's why it's so important that all of us work to raise the human stories. I've done 2 events with the governor. I'm working with her office every day to try to raise those human stories so people understand that it's children. Medicaid's the largest payer of long-term care. What are we gonna do? Throw seniors out of nursing homes? So we just have to keep, there've been a lot of rallies. I feel like I've spoken, I don't think it's an exaggeration that I'm close to 50 now, that I've spoken at in about the last 6 weeks, but they're making a difference. We can't stop. They've got to see us raising our voices. And you're focused on the social safety net programs. They're eliminating LAHI, the utility fund to help people who need help in morning. They're eliminating the money for clean water. Our EPA is really in danger. The Great Lakes Lab. We have to stand up and make those, just make the noise. This week they announced he's getting rid of, because he doesn't like it, because he doesn't like their news, NPR. And, but we're going to fight it. We're just going to flat out fight it. And that's what I want to tell you. We got to keep doing. This month is going to be all budget. It's going to be just trying to fight what he's doing and trying to stand up for what's right and to fight. I don't know, there's so many things, equity and inclusion and how he's trying to erase history and I could go all day, but you know what they are. Keep organizing. I'll be there with you. We got to keep talking about the issues. We got to fight back. And my outrage of the day, I found this out last night at about midnight, where one of my colleagues said, well, it started out with he's doing Les Miserables is opening up at the Kennedy Center. And he is going to do a fundraiser for himself, starting at $2 million a ticket. And someone said, is that legal? And then my other colleague said, okay, I just told you all the program. I could go through the safety net, SNAP, Blue, all the things that he's cutting. They asked for five times their normal amount of money increase for the Kennedy Center. Oh. So I have to raise that today and make sure everybody knows that. I know it's good that I want to make sure that one goes national. But we can't give up. We got to keep our voices going. Mm-hmm.
That Musk is out. Is the department out or is just somebody else put in head?
Hold on 1 second here. Washington.
Yes, you stated that Musk is out. So is that department over or somebody else in charge?
The department has never been formally established. But the dose people are saying, and by the way, one of the most disturbing cases I find, I'm trying to give you a little hope, but then we could keep going to what makes your age, is that Trump is taking the case to the Supreme Court about giving Doge access to our Social Security, which he should never have. And we will know what kind of Supreme Court we have when they rule on that. So you're still going to see the Doge boys probably around, but once Musk leaves, that takes some of the power and the energy. And a lot of cabinet officers don't like him right now. But the danger is real. There are no guardrails. That is the problem right now. There are no guardrails, which is why we have to stay loud. We have to fight. We have to stay in the courts. We have to legislate. We have to not do circular firing squads. Mm-hmm.
Hold on.
Hi, Debbie. I really appreciate all you do. I was wondering, since the executive branch of the federal government is doing a lot of illegal things right now, and things that have already gone to the Supreme Court, they're still not doing what the Supreme Court has ordered. Why are Democratic states paying their federal taxes to the federal government?
First of all, Democratic states don't pay it's in you just paid your federal taxes or filed for an extension. You don't go through the state. We pay them directly to the IRS. So, and companies pay their taxes directly to the IRS. So that's one reason, because states really don't pay taxes directly. There are probably a lot of other 42%, some days I hear 48% of Michigan's budget is federal dollars. And we're fine. Look, you all can have your opinions of Governor Whitmer. I'm gonna say to you, Gretchen Whitmer fought and got a mission for Selfridge Air Force Base. And she's fighting to get money still brought back to the state. And we got to fight with all our might for those dollars. You know, now we need those road dollars. We don't know what's going to happen on those road dollars. That markup is happening. So we got to try to get that. But yet there've been Jeff was there, I'm sure. There've been presentations in Lansing and I've sat with one with Katie, with one of my colleagues who's warning of the kind of cuts that are going to be coming, especially to the social net program. I'm going to fight like hell to stop any of those cuts. And I'm fighting like hell to get my Republican colleagues on the record I'm not, I'm trying, everybody knows what I'm doing. But when John James is on the Energy and Commerce Committee, I'm going to have a lot of Michigan amendments that I'm going to dare him to vote against. So people in this state know what people are voting on, so how it's going to impact. So I'm going to fight like hell to oppose those. But we need those federal dollars. So it's you all have heard me talk about this. Everybody, I think I've seen every one of you at a rally someplace sometime, and my speech has gotten more and more. I'm very clear but I'm still trying to protect. It's like at Michigan, where I think freedom of speech has been banned. I think those kids are, we never had to live like that, where you had to measure every word and be worried you could be deported, expelled, or wouldn't get a job. That's not right. And we're feeling that freedom of speech loss in so many places. And yet why I say, and due process is a joke in this country right now. But having said that, I got to get the money for those researchers and those scientists at Michigan who are doing groundbreaking research. So and the governor is walking that same line. How do we keep money here? How do we make sure the programs we need, we're getting the money for? How do we make sure Medicaid doesn't get cut? How do we make sure the education dollars don't get cut? How do we keep our waters clean? How do we make sure the Great Lakes money is still coming? How do we make sure the roads are coming? And yet not be silenced. And I won't be silenced, but we don't put a target on individual groups. That you don't want to put, I'm worried about SNAP and Head Start and Meals on Wheels. Head Start's a real program we got to worry about right now. But how do you do it so that people know we're not being silent, but we don't put a target on the specific backs of people who could lose it just because we spoke up? And that's the governor's.
Do we have any questions in chat? You guys, this is your opportunity to ask a question directly to your congresswoman, who is one of the most powerful people in Washington. So back there. Great.
Hi, Debbie. When I hear do something, what I do is I email or write my congressman, which is you. What else can I do?
So I love hearing from all of you. And we answer the phones and I count the calls every day. And so I just want you to know that, but I'm not who you need to target. You need to find your friends in Tim Walberg's district and Bill. Here are my four, I'm about to get in trouble. Tim Walberg doesn't move on anything, but he is in the district next to us and everybody knows people that, know him. So you can try to move him. John James and Bill Huizenga are both contemplating statewide office. They need to know the issues they're going to be really held accountable for. So you need to push them. And then I say Jack Bergman has a heart. There are some rumors that he may be a no on the Medicaid proposals with us. I don't know that that's the case. But, John Molinar is a very good man. He's a very solid Christian, not likely to change his vote, but try. And Lisa McLean's always going to be leadership. So, but keep the pressure on. Find everybody you know in those other offices, or find a summer home in their districts and use the zip code, or use a relative or friend's address and zip code and write them from there. And show up at their events.
I had a question about the budget battle. What's the current status of funding for Planned Parenthood? Because I know I got an email blast from them the other day talking about how
That's going to be part of, they're going to treat us totally eliminate them. And there's two, we're in what's called reconciliation right now, which is where we're the authorizers. So that's where Medicaid's in our committee. But then we're going into the appropriations process too. And there will be appropriation riders that will probably try to specifically be on Planned Parenthood, and we'll all vote against it. And we got to try to get enough Republicans that it doesn't get included. We can try to make it not in order in the Rules Committee, but that's gonna, we're just fighting everything.
Thank you.
Kathleen?
Oh,
Yeah, Debbie, first of all, thank you for all you do for us. And I've seen you at many of those rallies and you speak well, and I'm so proud of you. So I would just like to say, I hear on television all the time when they talk about what the Democrats are doing or not doing, it's like the Democrats are not standing up and talking about all this chaos that's being foisted upon us. What do you think, or can you suggest what we as an organization, as Washtenaw Dems, could do to speak up, to make ourselves known, to make our message known that goes beyond just coming to meetings, but it goes beyond this and some kind of outreach. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I do, actually. And I've been yelling at my staff, who I love my staff. But I think we've got to, what the Republicans have is Ethernet. They've built out this, and they get followers and they have influentials, and someone texts something and they raise it up and they pass it on and it goes all around. We need to find a way to help raise messaging so that when Jeff something's happening at the county, that gets like, when I do stuff or do a video that should, or if he came, help us get it out there, help us spread the word and get the facts out there, because the Republicans are very great at their own set of facts and distributing it everywhere. So we really have to get far better in being, how do we make the algorithms work for us? And that's one of the things that we've got to do more digital. We've got to get more out there. We got to get on the podcast. That's something that we all really need to do, is how do we and a rapid response team. I'm like, we have to get a rapid response team. Like when he puts something out that's wrong, we got to push back and get everybody else pushing it back. Join with other clubs.
Let me give you a specific. You've heard the kerfluffle about Jeff Bezos, and he was going to put all of the tariff add-ons on his website. This is a very good idea.
Yes, it is, but Donald Trump went after him.
We need to resurrect this idea. Who do I whisper this concept? Whose ear do I go to whisper this concept so that it happens?
So everybody needs to start demanding from retailers that they want to see what the costs are of the tariffs. And it's got to be, we can start it in Washtenaw, but it needs to be nationwide. People are so afraid of Donald Trump.
It needs to be on the web. How do we put it on the web?
But that's what we all have to do, is we have to start to learn how to go viral. We have to learn how to lift up, meet with the algorithms. For Indivisible is one source. Indivisible's got a good national network. I just have to say that point blank, and some of the other groups that do that, but we got to start to get the national groups to really take and say, we want to know how much. Autos go into effect today. Prices are going to go up. Why are people not, first of all, when Donald Trump says, okay, Christmas might be hard this year. Your kids may only have 2 Barbie dolls, not 30. What average parent has 30 Barbie dolls under? That shows how out of touch with reality he is to begin with. But I mean, it does. Okay, so we should have been pushing, but well, I did push back on that. But although I probably would have gotten my 30 Barbie dolls if she wanted them, but we need to like be pushing back on this stuff, and we need to be demanding accountability. I'm actually having a meeting with Ken Martin next week, and I met with a group yesterday that's got an idea. So we're going to keep pushing on this, but we are part. Everybody says, what do? We have to get what he's got, which is this echo chamber. We got to be part of developing that echo chamber for us and getting the facts.
100%. Ken Martin, by the way, is the chair of the Democratic National Committee. One last question from the chat, and that is, what's the best source of information about how proposed cuts will affect Washtenaw? Probably your newsletters, I'm guessing.
Yeah, if I ever, I'm writing the next one now, but it doesn't, I will put together, we just got his proposed budget. It's also a very fluid document. We should be doing the same for the state's looking at its budget now too. Maybe we could create a budget document that's got the federal and state. I'll talk to the state legislators, but it's fluid. Like we got his proposed budget yesterday, which is really dead on arrival. And then we've got these next reconciliation. Then we have the appropriations process, which by the way, was a joke last year. We never got an appropriation process. We got a continuing resolution that expires on September 30th. But we could find a way to talk about how programs, like we've already started, as Katie and these guys know, is how much federal dollars come into Washtenaw County directly, how much come through the state. We can do some kind of, we'll get our teams to work on something.
It'd be great for you guys, because if the state and federal Democrats got together and say, this is what they want, this is what it would cost us, and this is what we're fighting for, that'd be.
We have to remember, It's a document always in process that can change like 5 minutes after we put it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the truth. So, but yeah, we can figure out something. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. All right, real quick, we have our speaker. Josh Bivens is here, and I can't wait to hear from him, Chief Economist and Research Director of the Economic Policy Institute, discussing globalization's cost for American workers, what the government should do and not do. So welcome to Josh. But before we call him up, I want to say that the two things. One, Michigan Resistance. Does anybody have their, Josephine, do you have the sign up for Michigan Resistance? I'm saying it because Michigan Resistance organizes phone calls from blue areas to Democrats in red areas. Is this still working? Okay. To Democrats in red areas. And so you can do what Debbie suggested in a systematic way. Sign up for Michigan Resistance, get on their calls once or twice a week, and then they, generate lists for us to call in red areas to pressure Congress people. They're super important. And then in terms of getting out and showing up, the tool created by Washtenaw County volunteers called mivoter.org, mivoter.org. And it was developed out of our voter guide by amazing technical experts who are volunteers for Washtenaw County, and has now been adopted by the state party. Has a list of all of the protests that are publicly recorded, all of the local protests near you. So you just pull up mivoter.org on your phone and put in your address, and all the protests near you that are publicly recorded will flow. into your phone. So it's fantastic. And you can also choose another county. If you're going to be over in Berrien or wherever, you can choose that county instead. But it is a fantastic asset. It can be hard to know all the things that are going on because a lot is going on. So thank you. I will say thank you to Charles Roth in particular. He's not the person who developed the whole tool, but Charles is the guy who's made sure that we know where the protests are near us and everybody else in the state. So very cool. I'm now happy to turn the mic over to Eli Nathans. And I just want to call out Annie Somerville and Eli Nathans are the co-chairs of our of our programs committee, and work really hard every month to bring all this great information to us. So thank you. Josephine.
You want to talk about fundraising, like how we need money?
Yes. We do need money, and I'm with Annie that it's important to do direct service, and also the party needs funds. I was going to talk about it more a little bit later, so yeah, but the party does need funds, and I'll put a QR code out there for you to help support the party, okay? Because of putting out all of the stuff that we do costs money. It's all done by volunteers. Nobody's paid to do it, but there are material costs that we do need help with. Thanks, Josephine.
Thank you very much. The next speaker, it's a bit unusual for this group to invite someone to speak who's not from Washtenaw County and not from Michigan. Josh Bivens is the chief economist at the Economic Policy Institute, which is really the leading labor-supported think tank that focuses on economic issues. And the Programs Committee asked him to speak because of the feeling the Democratic Party needs to have a clearer, not just message, but policy to respond to the damage being caused to labor by globalization. That's what's created the space for Donald Trump to basically kind of, in an extremely crude way, attempt his own policy on this subject. We need to have a clearer policy. So with that, I will turn this over to Josh Bivens. Thank you so much, Josh, for coming and talking to us.
Thanks so much for having me. Hopefully people can hear pretty well. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I will just say two words about where I'm coming from, the Economic Policy Institute. As Eli mentioned, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank in Washington, D.C. We see our mission is making sure that the interests of low and moderate income families are given their proper due in policy debates. Whether it's trade policy, retirement policy, tax policy, we really take the view of a policy is only successful when it actually raises living standards for low and moderate income families. In the trade debate, that means we have often been kind of skeptics of the push to sign ever more free trade agreements that has sort of characterized DC in the past 30 years. And I think we have a strong track record on that. If anyone is interested in anything I have to say, feel free to get in touch. I can give you more information or go to our website, epi.org. We've got lots of good stuff. So in terms of the topic today, globalization and what policy should do, I'm going to start by basically saying, pretend that the Trump administration policy whipsaws of the past 3 months or so hadn't happened. Pretend we're back in January 2025. And we just want to know, how should smart people who've been thinking about the challenges of globalization for American workers, how should they be thinking about all this going forward? Once we have that framework of what a good set of policies and approaches should be, we'll use it to evaluate what's happened since. I'll just start with 1 minute to sketch out what is, I think, a really poorly understood tension in lots of these debates, and it's one we're surfacing. It's the tension between the fact that there's almost no overlap between free trade and the trade agreements the US has actually signed in recent decades. And I'll just basically say contemporary trade agreements, basically everything from NAFTA forward, have gone far beyond just trying to lower traditional trade restrictions at the border. If you look just at tariffs, which are in the news these days, NAFTA lowered tariffs on imports from Mexico into the United States from about 5% to 3%. It was not a trade agreement about lowering tariffs because tariffs were already extremely low when it was signed. And yet somehow it took 1,700 pages of text to do this. Instead, what these modern trade agreements do is they cover regulatory standards, health and safety rules, investment, banking and finance, intellectual property protections, all of these other subjects not having to do with trade. And why do they do this? I would argue they do it because they offer a new instrument for a bunch of corporate interests to lock in rules that protect or expand their profits. And I think it's really illustrative to just look at two trade agreements, one signed before NAFTA, kind of the old style, one signed after, both with very small countries where we had a lot of leverage. Those agreements are the US-Israel and US-Singapore trade agreements. The US-Israel Free Trade Agreement was signed in 1985. It's less than 20 pages long. Almost every single one of the pages is devoted to actual trade issues, lowering tariffs, rules of origins, things like that. The US-Singapore Free Trade Agreement went into effect in 2004, so it's a modern one. It's on the NAFTA model. It has more than 70,000 words. Of its 20 chapters, only 7 actually cover conventional trade topics. Intellectual property rights take up 81 words in the US-Israel agreement. They occupy 9,000 words plus 2 side letters in the US-Singapore agreement. That is, the intellectual property provisions of the US-Singapore agreement are longer by themselves than the entire US-Israel agreement. These intellectual property provisions are just, frankly, protectionist. They are meant to protect the monopoly profits of industries like pharmaceuticals, software, and entertainment. So that's the background. I would say those in favor of like the pre-Trump trade policy status quo of signing NAFTA-style trade agreements, they did a really good job claiming their policy agenda of signing these trade agreements was driven by a commitment to free trade. I'd argue it mostly wasn't. I think it was driven by sort of the hijacking of trade policy by a group of corporate interests who were less interested in free trade and more interested in just highly selective protectionism for their particular sector. Sort of trade agreements and rhetoric about free trade aside, there is a separate challenge of globalization. Lots of the growth of global trade and investment flows, call this globalization, that we saw in the past 30 to 40 years is not really about our own domestic policy choices or our trade agreements. Other countries made choices, pretty profound ones. Countries like China and big swaths of Latin America decided to reorient their economies to exports rather than domestic demand. And how we reacted to this and managed the outcome of these other countries' choices has been a real failure for US workers. And so here what I see is like the main challenges that globalization has imposed for US workers. There's basically 6. Growing import flows from low-wage nations put sort of modest but steady downward pressure on wages for workers without a college degree in the United States. 2, chronic trade deficits have reduced employment in US manufacturing and raised our foreign debt. 3, the US has not done enough intentional industrial policy, sort of figuring out, are there strategic sectors where we need to produce more in the United States to solve key problems? 4, competition from foreign labor that is made cheap through abusive labor practices and trading partners is unfair and should be addressed. 5, failure to harmonize climate policy internationally means that anytime one country does something to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, often that just pushes production to a country that has not done any such regulatory move to reduce emissions. So the emissions don't get reduced. They just get moved around the globe. And that's bad for a bunch of reasons. And then finally, and this is a big one, failure to harmonize corporate tax treatment across countries means corporations get to choose their own tax rates by flocking to tax havens. And so that means the tax burden falls on everybody else. And so I'm just going to give some detail on those first 3 I mentioned, and then I'll just say a couple sentences about the last 3 all in one bucket, and then I'll be done. First, on the wage pressure that I mentioned, this is one of the biggest pressures I think globalization has put on lots of American workers. The source of this wage pressure is just the fact that imports from lower wage countries tend to intensively use non-college labor much more than US exports do. So this means as we sort of have jobs displaced by imports, the non-college labor displaced can't get absorbed in our export sector. It has to go find jobs elsewhere in the economy. And so that means trade flows are putting downward pressure on wage growth for non-college workers, which is a group that comprises well over 60% of the workforce. This is not a niche problem. This is a majority problem. And 2, it doesn't just affect workers in the tradable industries who got displaced by imports. It spills over and puts downward pressure on wages for non-college workers throughout the economy. One way to think about it, like landscapers might not think their wages are being affected by trade, but they are, because they are finding themselves in competition with people who used to work in manufacturing sectors and who have been displaced by imports. I would say, though, it is important to remember that policy choices, which sort of abetted wage suppression throughout the US economy, they were not confined to choices about globalization and trade. In fact, non-trade forces, also supported by intentional policy decisions, we're putting far more intense downward pressure on wages than trade flows. We have sort of a preferred measure of like the wage problem in the United States. And it's basically saying how much have wages grown for typical workers or for non-college workers relative to how much economy-wide productivity growth has risen over that time. And the gap between those two things is sort of the gap between actual wages and wages the economy should have been able to deliver to people. Of that gap, only about 10 to 15% is probably driven by the effect of these trade flows. The rest is driven by things like attacks on unions, failure to really get ourselves out of recession really quickly, failure to control employer practices like making people sign non-compete agreements and non-poaching agreements among employers, and lots of domestic policy solutions. And so I think if you look at the wage pressures from globalization, one way to say it is they're not trivial. They're probably costing non-college workers throughout the economy on the order of $1,000 to $2,000 per year that they otherwise could have had. The non-globalization influences pushing down their wages are probably costing them closer to $10,000 or more per year. And so I think seeing the wage problem as only a globalization problem, I think is a real miss for what would do much more to give people some room to see their wages grow. Okay, the second big problem I mentioned is sort of basically the trade deficit in manufacturing that has pushed a lot of workers out of the manufacturing sector. I would say these manufacturing trade deficits probably have pushed 2 to 2.5 million workers out of manufacturing in the US. That's a very big deal. Why did we develop these trade deficits? Just a quick detour into the current debate. It's not because we cut tariffs. For one, the tariff cuts we've undertaken since the early 90s, they're really small. They're not what drove trade deficits. For another, across countries, high tariffs actually are associated with higher, not lower trade deficits. Instead, deficits are driven near entirely by the value of the US dollar being too high to balance exports and imports. And that's an outcome driven almost entirely by a bunch of macro policy decisions. Basically, a high value of the dollar makes imports cheap for US customers, so we buy a lot of them, makes US exports really expensive on global markets, really hard to compete, and so you get a trade deficit. I would say it's often been taken as a given that the US should pursue a strong dollar policy, and that's often been like the implicit, sometimes even explicit goal of Treasury departments, both in Republican and Democratic administrations. That's not great. The bias towards dollar strength has led directly to the toleration of these really large trade deficits, which have just been really hard on manufacturing employment. Serious policy to reduce trade deficits means serious policy about the dollar. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in 1 second. I'll just say one thing, though, that illustrates a lot of this. There are really good reasons to reduce the trade deficit. We should do it. It's no longer true, though, that manufacturing jobs are much better jobs than average and that closing the deficit would by itself deliver benefits on this front. It once was true that manufacturing jobs were much better jobs, but the manufacturing wage premium, sort of the excess wages that manufacturing workers got relative to workers who kind of look like them in other sectors, that's just about gone by now, and we know why. It's because the unionization rate in manufacturing has been beaten down to basically the same as the overall economy-wide level. What made the manufacturing sector a locus of really good jobs in past decades wasn't anything super inherent about manufacturing, it was the unions. So at the same time that we think about bringing manufacturing jobs back, or some bit of them back, we also really need to think about how to bring unions back, both in manufacturing, but also crucially in the rest of the economy. It's unionization that was the real secret sauce for creating good jobs in manufacturing or any sector. So just a couple words on what a serious dollar policy to reduce trade deficits would mean. One, we just need to have currency management that keeps the dollar in line at a sort of in a band that doesn't allow really large trade deficits to develop. We need to actively manage financial flows in and out of dollar assets. This sounds a little weird. I would just say it, I'm happy to talk in detail, but we have a Federal Reserve that monitors and sets interest rates. We need a Federal Reserve or a Treasury or a mix of the two that has the job of monitoring and keeping exchange rates in a reasonable band as well. Two, another thing we need fiscal policy that allows space for interest rates to come down. Fiscal policy is the decisions from Congress and the president about taxes and budget to get the dollar lower. This means we need smaller federal budget deficits, which will put some downward pressure on interest rates and allow the dollar to come down through that channel. I would just say our deficits in recent years have just been too large, given how healthy the economy was until early 2025. And to be clear, the big surges of COVID, aid and relief in 2020 and 2021 made a lot of sense. But we don't raise enough in taxes during normal times to cover our spending in normal times. This was not always true. It's true now entirely because of the rolling tax cuts we enacted all through the 2000s. I'd just say one note on why I know it's like revenue that's the problem on trade deficits. This gets a little wonky, but I'll just say that the Congressional Budget Office, they make 10-year budget projections. In 2000, their projections were for surpluses forever. Then the George W. Bush administration came in and cut taxes really sharply, but those taxes were set to expire in 2010. And in 2010, the CBO projected 10 years ahead, assuming those tax cuts went away. And when they did that, they said that by 2019, revenue as a share of GDP would be just under 20%, basically the same as it was in 2000 before the tax cuts, which was an amazingly good year for the economy, by the way, not a year where taxes were somehow a problem. If you look in actual 2019, after 70% of the Bush tax cuts were preserved, and after the Trump tax cuts of 2017, revenue was less than 15% of GDP. This 5% shortfall between what we would have had without those set of tax cuts versus what we actually got, that's twice as large as what would be needed today to keep our deficit sustainable forever. So that set of rolling tax cuts that we've seen since 2000 has been why we've had these large budget deficits, and those budget deficits keep interest rates higher than they need to be, which is a problem for trade deficits. Okay, the third big challenge, the US needs a more intentional industrial policy. We have not said too much about tariffs so far, but I would say tariffs are a very legitimate and useful tool in the industrial policy toolkit when they're used strategically. And by industrial policy, I just mean when the government makes a decision to use policy tools, subsidies, regulations, tariffs, to nudge the economy into producing more of some good in the United States. It's basically the government overriding what the market says should be produced in the United States and say, nope, there's a market failure here. We think more of that good should actually be produced within our borders. And if we follow the market, we're not going to have enough. So we're not going to follow the market. We're going to use policy tools to nudge us into making more. One clear example of this is investments in supply chain resilience. Basically, recent decades have seen multinational corporations prioritize short-term profits, even at the expense of investing in the resilience of their supply chains. So for example, a company that focuses on short-term profits might source every single one of their inputs from the lowest cost producer, even if that concentrates it all in one source. Or they might say, we're not going to hold inventories of key inputs because inventories are inputs not being sold and generating profits. The way we felt this problem of underinvestment in supply chain resilience recently was the inflation in the years following the pandemic. That inflation was absolutely kicked off by supply chains that broke down and were unable to keep pace with like a really sharp change in the composition of what Americans were demanding. Basically, we started consuming far fewer services, far more goods all of a sudden because of the pandemic, and the supply chains for goods just weren't up to the task. And just one really specific example of that, US automakers canceled large orders of semiconductors in early 2020 because they saw the COVID recession and said, we think that's going to last a long time. Turned out the recession didn't last that long. Recovery came quickly, and those automakers couldn't get those semiconductors back. And car prices soared. And it raises the question, why would you ever cancel an order of your most important input? Semiconductors can be a third of the cost of a car. Why would you cancel that order? I think you'd cancel it if you were overweighting short-run profitability over resilience. And I think that's what happened. And so I think what you saw during, let's say, the Biden administration was, through things like the CHIPS Act and some other things, a real effort to say we need an industrial policy that says more of the key parts of our supply chains and manufacturing should be nudged either to sort of friendshoring, like just a more diverse sort of realm of producers, or actually within the borders of the United States. And here you can imagine tariffs going along with subsidies and regulations to like make sure this actually happens. I would say the strategic uses of tariffs, in regards to industrial policy, there's no general rule about when they're good or bad. They're almost by definition a response to a idiosyncratic market failure. we think we're not producing enough semiconductors for reasons X and Y. And so it's hard to just make a general call, tariffs good or bad. Often they're good. Often the arguments for them are not so good. And so it's a case by case basis. But I would say your reasoning should be really transparent and sound to both US customers and to foreign trading partners when you're putting tariffs on. The last three challenges, I'll just say a couple words about right now there, and then I'll say 3 words about the current policy regime, and then I'm happy to answer questions. The last 3 challenges were basically about the need to harmonize policies regarding labor standards, climate policy, and taxes to avoid sort of global races to the bottom. They're all important. Happy to give some texture on each if anybody wants later. I'll just say the one thing that unites them all, they illustrate the need for international policy coordination. Like if we had spent a lot more time in the past 4 decades constructing international agreements to make progress on harmonizing labor standards and shutting down tax havens and harmonizing climate policy, rather than signing a bunch of trade agreements that were mostly exercises in ensuring that like the pharmaceutical, software, and entertainment industries were able to collect full US level profits on sales abroad, globalization would have worked much better for typical workers in this time. Besides, requiring international policy coordination, these things, it basically means that having a US government that really doesn't like the idea of ever working constructively with other countries in the economic policy space is not going to be a great one for genuinely helping US workers. So if like those are the big picture policies about what we should be doing to sort of construct a policy regime toward globalization, where are we today? I mean, I think we all know where we are today. We've got these large, chaotic tariffs that kind of vary almost by the day, providing zero certainty for planning. And one of the worst things about them is that the simple rationale for them shift about as often as the level. Like, are they to stop fentanyl? Are they to get a better deal from other countries? What does that better deal mean? Sometimes they're supposed to close the trade deficit and rebuild US manufacturing. They really can't do that across the whole sector. Really broad and high tariffs reduce exports about as effectively as imports. They can reduce tariffs, can reduce trade deficits in a narrow sector, steel, semiconductors, solar panels. But you have to choose a small handful of sectors to protect if your only tool is tariffs. The more sectors you try to protect with tariffs, the fewer you actually can protect. And there's basically 3 reasons for why they reduce exports as much as imports. 1, just retaliation. We all see it. We do tariffs, other people do tariffs, that hurts our exports. 2, a huge part of what we actually export is made with imported inputs. And so at the same time we're providing protection in the United States, we're also making the cost of production quite a bit higher through tariffs on imported inputs. And so we're sort of helping on one hand, giving our own producers some domestic competitive breathing room with the tariff, but hurting them on the other hand by saying, but you got to pay a lot more for your imports. And so you're not helping the export competitiveness of your country much at all. And then 3, big tariffs tend to lead to changes in the exchange rate. They strengthen the dollar, which is the trade deficit problem I talked about before. I will say, that if you search for grains of whatever, wisdom, truth, right ideas, and what's been going on in recent years, the US-China trading relationship is unbalanced and unhealthy and needs a reset. I'd say the key issue is that China needs to reorient its own economy back towards domestic consumption and less toward just running large trade surpluses against the world. The best tool for both sides to affect that reorientation is through currency policy. Currency management is how China generated the large trade surpluses against us. Undoing this management would both help our own manufacturing, but it would also help China's domestic purchasing power. And then just one last word on sort of the Trump tariff policy of recent years. The size and the breadth of the tariffs alone are close to recessionary, combined with other Trump initiatives like federal employees attack, the deportations, the sabotaging of foreign travel to the US. I think they will certainly become recessionary. The uncertainty and chaos with which they're being implemented is incredibly damaging. Basically, that tariff whipsaw is making it impossible for a huge range of businesses to do any serious planning at all for future investments. Like, should I build a factory here or there in the United States? Depends entirely on where your inputs are coming from, and where your inputs are going to come from depends on the tariff rate. And so it's basically freezing this huge range of business investment until there's some clarity. And business investment is always the most volatile part of GDP and the one whose collapse triggers recessions. And this chaos and uncertainty of the tariff policy is just perfectly calibrated to do that kind of freezing of business investment and really make a recession very likely. And I would just say, there's talk about how that recession will be some kind of necessary purge and will emerge better on the other side. Not if all we do is continue to rely on really large tariffs. They won't close the trade deficit. They won't add manufacturing jobs. They will lower output. They'll raise prices. They'll make us poorer in the long run. Basically, there's just no long run upside here because they are leaning incredibly hard on a single, not very powerful tool of tariffs when they should be thinking much more broadly about all of this. So I'm going to wrap up here. Sorry if I've gone on too long, and happy to talk for as long as people would like.
Thank you so much. There is time for a couple of questions. I think you kind of created a course for a whole semester in 25 minutes. Any questions? Just wait. Tom, could you pass the microphone?
Yeah. Yep. Who are we going to?
The gentleman at the back of his hand up.
Yep. Coming around. Okay. Testing. Oh, bad.
Did that mic quit?
Testing.
You're on, come on.
Hello. My question actually is about the bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. I was wondering if in your research, if you took into consideration any automation type programming that might impact those jobs if they were to come back. Is there anything that shows that there could be either a positive or negative impact on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say a couple things. One, just we will a version of this talk is going to be a paper we're going to release in the next couple of weeks. So if anyone is interested in some of these issues there, and we address that a bit. It's often the claim is sometimes made, usually by people trying to defend the pre-Trump trade policy status quo, that the decline in manufacturing has mostly actually been about automation. It's not been about trade, nothing we can do about it. I'd say that's less than half true. If you look at what happened to actual employment in US manufacturing over the very long run, from 1965 to 2000, there's 35 years where we had a lot of automation. We had a lot of technological change. By the way we measure it as economists, actually faster automation and technological change than we've seen since. And yet the level manufacturing employment was really stable in that time period. It was 18 to 19 million, depending on the business cycle. We have 12.5 million workers in manufacturing today, a third less than we did in 2000. It wasn't because automation all of a sudden happened in 2000. It was because we started running really large trade deficits on a regular basis after that. My estimate is of that difference between 18 million manufacturing jobs and something like 13 million today, half or a little bit more is due to those trade deficits. So I'm not going to say if we close the trade deficits, we get all the jobs back that we've lost since then, but we get a really large chunk of them back, even if you account for automation in that period. So I think accounting for that automation is really important. Automation does put pressure on manufacturing employment, really fast productivity growth combined with the fact that people just don't spend more and more of their income on manufacturing goods as they get richer. We buy slightly nicer fridges, but we don't buy 7 fridges for our house. So there's always a little bit of pressure on manufacturing from automation and that sort of level of demand. But the real collapse in employment, there are huge fingerprints of trade deficits on it over this time period as well.
Thanks very much. I think there's time for one more question. Yeah, or then I'll just at the back of the room there. 1 second here. One more, Josh.
Where do you want me to go, Eli? Right there.
Yep.
Great.
Hi. Is this the tariffs, and Trump's plan to weaken the dollar in the international monetary system?
I don't know if I heard the last part of that. I heard,
Trump's plan to weaken the dollar by raising tariffs. Is that his plan? In the international monetary system.
right, okay, yes. One, like what their plan is, boy, that's hard to tell. You hear a lot of people trying to like backcast some kind of strategic idea about what they're really going for. I would say a couple things. One, all else equal, really large tariffs tend to push up the value of the dollar, not push it down. And so it's a weird plan. I would say the bank shot through which the tariffs could weaken the dollar is if they actually cause a recession. And a recession will also help us close the trade deficit because people stop spending on everything, including imports, but it's obviously a horrible way to close the trade deficit. It doesn't help anybody. I would say every now and then people associated with the Trump administration claim to have a strategic vision that includes the need to reduce the value of the dollar. That's one part in the vision that I do think has to happen. I think the US dollar has been too strong for the past couple of decades, and a reasonable, focused plan to like reduce it on a gradual basis would do a ton to help close the trade deficit and help manufacturing. So yeah, I think the lower value of the dollar is in the mix of all of their various policy targets and justifications. It doesn't seem to me to be, it doesn't seem like they're approaching the whole thing with that being their main focus, because they would be doing things very differently if that was their main focus.
Thank you very much. I think at this point, we have to turn the discussion over to the next panel. I just want to point out, Josh has said that he will make the PowerPoint slides that he prepared to accompany this talk available. So when we post this video, we will also post the PowerPoint. And Josh, if you just do me a favor, would you also include recommendations for reading? For those of us who aren't quite as knowledgeable as you are, what 3 or 4 books should we read to become more educated about all these issues, which are clearly quite central? Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Be happy to do that. Thanks so much for having me.
And now it is the time for our panel. Kathy, would you care to come forward? And the panelists whose names are up here. Thank you, Tom, for being on the mic.
I'd like to just point out that Chris Watson, who's an Ann Arbor City Council person, is here, and also the vice chair of the party. Jason Morgan, who's our state rep in this part of the city, is also here. Hello, Jason. And Ryan Hussey, who is chair of the 6th Congressional District and our co-chair for fundraising, is also here. So welcome. If you're here, good chance to talk to your reps. Happy to introduce Kathy Wyatt.
Hi, folks. I'm Kathy Wyatt, one of the co-chairs of the Outreach and Community Engagement Committee. So I'm going to briefly and quickly introduce our 4 panelists, and then they will tell you a little bit more about themselves and what they do. All of our panelists are here in their personal capacity. They will be talking about there's need in our community, the services that the organizations that they are lead provide, but they are here in their personal capacity. So we have Dan Kelly from the Shelter Association, Amanda Carlisle from the Washtenaw Housing Alliance, Shonagh Taruza from Alpha House, and Toni Kayumi from OCED. So we'll start with Dan, and he'll tell you a little bit more about himself, his background, and about the Shelter Association, what they do, the services they provide around homelessness and the housing crisis.
Everyone hear me? Thank you, Kathy, for sharing that. Yeah, as Kathy mentioned, I'm Dan Kelly, the director of the Shelter Association, also known, many folks locally might know us as the Delana Center. That's our primary building. We also have sites across the county. We're the primary single adult shelter. We serve about 1,300 people
Dan,
annually.
point the mic toward you instead of the ceiling.
Right here. Okay.
Thank you.
We serve about 1,300 people annually. I've been working in homeless and housing services for the last 20 plus years. I worked in Oakland County, Macomb, Wayne, Detroit, as well as now coming out here 2017. So need is on the rise. We'll talk more about that later, but we serve up to 215 people on a given night, providing them emergency shelter and basic need services, ultimately to help them get back on their feet and get into permanent housing.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Amanda Carlisle, the director of the Washtenaw Housing Alliance, and I have been doing homeless services for a little bit less than 20 years, previously in the cities of Chicago and Detroit before coming to Washtenaw County, and have been with the Washtenaw Housing Alliance for 11 years now. We are sort of the umbrella organization for folks and service providers and government partners working to end homelessness. Our mission is to end homelessness in Washtenaw County and expand affordable housing options. And so we provide a lot of coordination, systems coordination, advocacy, education for the community, and then also to have some specific programming around landlord engagement and outreach, because we know that we need to get folks housed in the community, and there are multiple ways to do that, but one of those is really working with our property managers and landlords in the community.
Hi, my name is Shonagh, and I started off actually training as a scientist in Zimbabwe and then worked in the UK for just under 10 years in ecotoxicology research, and then came to the US and got into the ministry, went to seminary, Master of Divinity degree. But my path to where I am right now is within the church. I always gravitated towards the homeless ministry. So I became a leader of the Vineyard Homeless Ministry and then volunteered at the Breakfast at St. Andrews and then joined their board and then moved to another church and was the Minister of Social Justice and did a lot of racial justice work. And then I joined Alpha House in January 2023, so I'm fairly new to my role. So Alpha House is, we're known as the Interfaith Hospitality Network at Alpha House because we're a group of about 35 churches, local churches, that came together to form the Interfaith Hospitality Network and still sustain us in our operations. So we're based on Jackson Road at Alpha House, and we provide sheltering for families. And we also have a rapid rehousing program, so we try to make sure that as soon as the families come into shelter, we're trying to help them figure out their next steps to permanent housing. We recently expanded and we're now able to house 14 families at a time. We're set to expand even further, and I'll share more after Toni's introduced herself. But recently we also got into hoteling. So we're trying to provide a wide range of options for families experiencing homelessness, and I'll share more a bit later.
Good morning. I'm Toni Kayumi. I'm the director of Washtenaw County's Office of Community and Economic Development. That's a mouthful, so that's why people just say OCED usually. We have many divisions inside of OCED. So we have the Human Services Division, which primarily we have our homeless services and other human services programs, working a lot with our nonprofit partners on a variety of different topics. We have our Housing and Infrastructure Division, which is involved in a lot of the affordable housing construction that takes place in our community. We have our Finance and Operations team. We push out in OCED, leveraging over $100 million a year out into community. And so needless to say, we need our own finance team to be able to get that money out into community to those other organizations that help us and collaborate with us in serving those in need. We also have our Economic Opportunity Division, which is the Financial Empowerment Center, as well as a lot of different events such as apprenticeship fairs, small business fairs, and other things that take place in our community. And then we have our Community Development Division. And the Community Development Division has historic preservation and brownfield redevelopment inside of it. Brownfield redevelopment is also crucial in the creation of affordable housing. So that's sort of OCED in a nutshell. I had actually only been in government for a year and a half. Previous to that, I was a nonprofit leader for many years and worked in YMCAs in the Midwest, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in Cleveland, and in Ann Arbor. And in the Cleveland YMCA is where I had a lot of my experience related to homeless services. We ran our own homeless shelter, as well as an actual homeless program that really was in depth. People could stay for over 2 years or up to 2 years to really be able to change their lives, gain workforce certifications that they needed to be successful, start putting money aside to be able to, when they leave our housing, be able to get their own apartment or some other place, family reunification, all of those types of things. And we also ran a prison reentry program that also involved long-term housing and the similar services of those natures. So quite a bit of a nonprofit experience, and so can really resonate with our partners, having done the direct services work myself years ago.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves and the organizations that you lead. So as most everyone knows in this room and probably watching, Washtenaw County, like the state and the nation, is experiencing a housing and homelessness crisis. And so we have these experts here that can tell us a little bit more about the challenges, the needs they see here in Washtenaw County. And then once they lay that out, we will circle back and have a discussion about what's being done and what still needs to be done and how this group can help. So, and we'll have questions from the audience. So since Dan sat next to me, I guess he's going to be going first again. Dan, could you tell us from your perspective as the director of the Shelter Association, what you've seen and what you've been seeing in the community as far as needs?
Yeah, happy to share that. As Kathy mentioned, unfortunately, we've seen an increase in need. I'm sure we've all seen these things nationally, news of increased homelessness. It's affecting us locally too. We've had record overnight census numbers the last 4 years in a row. This last year, as I mentioned earlier, we hit 215 people on a given night served through our shelter site programs this winter. That's up from only 160 people, I think 4 or 5 years ago. So every year it's going up. We've seen that, unfortunately. And then at the same time, we've also seen acuity of the guests go up. There's been a rapid increase in the different conditions folks are going through and their needs. The disability rate, which we track, that's gone from about 46% to over 70% in the last several years. We've had more, it's a correlation, more mental health issues, more self-medicating with substance use. We're seeing a more chronic population, more older adults too. That's gone from 26% to over 42% in the last several years. So kind of the two trends is both number of people in need is up on a nightly basis, and then also the acuity of the guests that we're serving is up as well.
So I'll speak for families. When I started in my role, there were 120 families on the CHIP list, and CHIP list, it stands for Community Housing Prioritization, and that's the number of the 120 families who were in need of shelter. And for context, Upper House at Jackson Road only had capacity for 6 families. So as soon as I started, I realized we're not doing anything really. If we've got 120 families, we can only serve 6 at our Jackson Road facility. So what I did was we very generous grant from MDHHS, infrastructure grant. I used that to convert our offices. I moved the staff out to another building downtown Ann Arbor, and I converted 8 of the staff offices into bedrooms. So we brought up the number of bedrooms to 14 total, and I added 3 additional fully accessible bathrooms to serve the extra guests. And so that was the whole of last year. And we also decided, knowing that 14 still wasn't going to do it, we decided to clear out our whole lower level. Just walk out. It's very, very nice down there. We cleared it. It was a toy play area for kids, but it was a lot of space. So we decided to clear everything out and create an overflow area. And I kind of thought, maybe we'll get 4, 6 families. At the peak of winter, I think we had 47 families within the Jackson Road building. In January, we were averaging 90 per night individuals when we'd been set up to serve between 20 and 24. And all of this, I just got to say thank you to OCD and the Board of Commissioners, because it was their funding that allowed us to do this winter sheltering. But we had to cap it at some stage because the fire marshal, I got to keep, the fire marshal happy and the staff, and, it was just getting really crazy at one stage. But it made me realize that we do need a lot more space. And so there's something in the pipeline that I won't share right now. I'll just go into some of the other stuff we saw this winter. Like Dan, a lot of the people that came, unfortunately, had either undiagnosed or untreated mental health illnesses, and that impacts your ability to hold down a job and keep housing. And then something else we noticed was that a number of the children were on the spectrum and, had high needs. And once again, that impacts a mother's ability, a parent's ability to work and hold down a job, because the kids need services and care and don't quite fit into the usual aftercare model type thing. And so the parents that came, they were stressed. They were, we all felt for them. We hadn't expected it. We hadn't, seen anything like this before, but we did our best. But it made us realize that we need to do a whole lot more for our community, and we're working on it. And there's promising things in the pipeline. But yeah, we got to get ahead of it by next winter, because I know you've been following what's been going on with the tariffs. I saw the video, and we know we're expecting that things are going to get harder. And so it's bad enough as it is. We've got to get ahead of it and prepare for what's coming next.
Amanda, or did you want to add anything, or Toni?
Of course, in an ideal world, we wouldn't need shelters. I am a huge fan of diversionary funding, so individuals and families hopefully will not be evicted from the apartments or homes that they are currently in. And diversionary funding is limited, and it tends to run out on the very first day, sometimes within hours, that we have the diversionary funding available each month. And Barrier Busters is the mechanism of that. It is financially managed by OCED, and then our collaborative partners, over 100 collaborative partners who have case managers and are working with individuals, help get that funding out to the people in need. For us, it is far less traumatic if someone is not evicted. It is far less expensive to do diversionary funding, versus homeless shelters or rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. And so I'm always a big proponent of hoping that we can get more diversionary funding, just because it makes financial sense in the long run, as well as far less traumatic for those impacted by financial distress. Of course, increased affordable housing is also ideal and something that we are all proponents of. And we all know in Washtenaw County, we are at a deficit in regards to affordable housing. We keep building more, but we lose more over time than we've been able to build. And the demand for that affordable housing continues to grow. And I think people hear a lot about there is a wait time to be able to get into shelters, or there is a wait time to be able to get into affordable housing. And that is not because staff of the nonprofit agencies or the county aren't doing their jobs. We don't have enough places for the individuals to go. We don't have enough beds, related to our shelters. We don't have enough affordable housing units, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, to be able to house everyone in need.
Yeah, thank you, all of you, for sharing a little bit. And I sort of sit at the 30,000 foot level of a lot of this work, but I was going to mention sort of the affordable housing needs in our community. So Washtenaw County has the highest housing market costs in the state of Michigan. Probably no surprise to all of us and you, but that's that's the reality that we're working with. We are, you know, incredibly expensive to be in this community and to live in this community, and for the families who have multiple children and childcare costs and, you know, food costs are rising. You know, housing is what ends up sort of at the end of the day. If you aren't able to have a roof over your head, that's why you're ending up in our shelter systems. And same thing for, you know, older adults and older adults, I'll say, especially folks that are living on Social Security disability. It doesn't pay for a one-bedroom unit. That just flat and simple. I have a sister-in-law who's on Social Security disability, and there's no way she can afford it without help from family to be able to live comfortably in a one-bedroom place. But I would just say that in terms of the affordable housing piece, we had a study in 2015 that the county did that was, you know, we needed 3,000 units of non-student affordable rentals. And within 2 years of that study being released, we lost 1,000 units of affordable housing in this county. And that is because private developers had gone in, used low-income housing tax credits, which is an IRS program, to build affordable housing. It's the largest program that builds affordable housing in this country. And once they reached their affordability periods, those private developers and owners ended up making those units market rate. So we had a huge displacement of folks in around 2015 through 2020, where folks were comfortably living maybe with a housing choice voucher in, say, Scioto Township or Pittsfield Township or City of Ypsi. Those units ended up getting, you know, going market rate. And so all of those folks ended up, for the most part, being displaced and moving into other parts of the county. And so that has just been exasperating all of the other kind of affordability issues we have in the county. Avalon Housing, a good piece of good news is they're building, they have a number of developments in the pipeline, but their Grove at Viridian project, which is made possible because of a donation of land from the county, and they're also, you know, compiling lots of different funding sources. They had 7,000 applicants for approximately 25 units for family housing. So that just speaks to the great need that is out there, and, you know, how much we are developing and need to develop, but we can't keep up with the demand.
I think we all owe the county commissioners.
Oops. I think the battery went dead, so I'll trade it. No, you're okay.
Can you hear this?
Yes, you're okay.
Maybe that was a lightning bolt saying yes. But I do think we need to recognize and thank our county commissioners who have made housing and homelessness a major priority. I know it's a priority at the state level as well, but you know, the saying is all politics is local. And when we talk politics in terms of human needs, our county commission has really stepped forward to support issues around homelessness and housing need. So as you could kind of hear from the panelists, there are two issues around, well, two major issues or categories around homelessness and housing, the housing crisis. And that is sheltering, immediate, you know, the need. Dan cited the numbers, record numbers of individuals that are, you know, they sheltered this year. And as you know, it looks like it's going to get worse. There's also the numbers that Amanda mentioned around affordable, you know, the housing that people can afford, and the big difference between the need and the actual available of low income affordable housing. So what I'd like the panel to discuss is what you know, how, what you your organization is seeing coming and what you're doing, how you can address the need to balance sheltering and also create low-income affordable housing, much of which, given the characteristics of the population that needs housing, needs wraparound services. So if you could kind of address the work that you're doing and what you see the need for in the future. You want to, and we'll make this a discussion so anybody can just jump in.
Okay. I just want to first of all ask you all, you're Democrats, right? So you saw Kamala's speech last week where she talked about the elephants at the San Diego Zoo. Do you remember that? Did any of you go and look at the clip to see you did? That was, it almost brought me to tears, seeing the elephants, how they responded to the earthquake. The earth is quaking right now for us as humans. And I was saying to Amanda yesterday, we had a meeting, that's a perfect analogy for what we're trying to do as a community. Like the elephants, you see when the earthquake starts, they're all scattered around the area and they sense that something is amiss. And so they start coming out. And then they form this circle. And in the middle, you see this little baby elephant. And the strange thing is the adult elephants are facing outwards in this circle. And they're protecting the most vulnerable who are shielded by their bodies. And so we had a meeting yesterday as the Winter Shelter Task Force. I said to Amanda, it kind of feels like that's what we're doing. You know, we have our different organizations, but we work very closely with each other, super closely. My brother Dan and I, we share a building downtown, the Ashley building, our staff. That's where I moved my staff out so that we could convert the offices. So we share a building with him. And anytime I have any questions, I'll text him and he responds, and great help. Work very closely with Amanda and Toni, SOS Community Services, and most importantly, the BOC. None of what Alpha House has done over the past 2 years would have been possible without these partnerships. And that's the key to us surviving this season. Where the earth is quaking, the storms are coming, whatever metaphors you want to use, it's bad. And so we, all of us, including all you here, we've got to get in and form a circle and protect the most vulnerable in our county. And so one of the ways that, as a Winter Shelter Task Force, that we're working is, like I said, we've got to get ahead of it. And so we met yesterday and we have a plan for what next winter should look like in an ideal world. And what it means is a variety of different options for families experiencing, or for anyone experiencing homelessness, but I can only speak for families. So on the family side, families come with all sorts of different challenges and are different and have different needs. And there's not one size fits all sheltering that's going to solve the issue. Some may benefit from short-term hoteling, and so we have a plan for that in partnership with Community Mental Health. Alpha House is currently working with Community Mental Health for after-hours people in crisis, hoteling them. So we're going to have hoteling. We've also applied for a master leasing program through MDHHS. So Alpha House is going to have 8 houses for the larger families. SOS is going to have a total, I think, of 12 houses. So there'll be 22 houses available for sheltering, probably by next winter, probably by fall, I think. And then we're going to have the Jackson Road facility, which has 14 rooms. And then what's in the pipeline is recently we've been negotiating a deal with one of our community partners, and it's going to allow us to have space for 30 families in studio-style apartments in a building on the east side of the county. And it's in partnership with the Board of Commissioners. Yeah, and it's only possible because of the partnership with the Board of Commissioners, with this other community partner. I can't share too much because we're still in the negotiation stage. We're almost at the finish line for signing everything, and then there's going to be a press release in June, and we'll be able to share more information. But the 30 rooms is only the first step. There's another 30 rooms that will bring the total to 60. So from when I first started at Alpha House, only having room for 6 families, now 14. By the time we get to December, the goal is to have space for 52 families total as Alpha House. But like I said, only in partnership with everyone else.
And also some things that have been in the works. You've heard us mention Avalon Housing. We work very closely with them in regards to creating more permanent supportive housing. We've also did a pilot program that is still under construction, Dorsey Estates in Ypsilanti. And it's an exciting project because it's not just renting a place, it's owning a place, and being able to eventually create some sort of intergenerational wealth, which, as we know, historically has been denied certain populations due to prejudices and redlining and other things that have existed. And so some of the things that's unique about that project, it's 46 affordable and attainable homes. Half are affordable, half are attainable, so 23 of each type. Also, what came along with this was down payment assistance. So many families would love to own their own home, but don't have the DPA. And so we had the opportunity through the Board of Commissioners and funding that became available to us at the county to be able to not only, because this was a brownfield project, help fund through the construction through brownfield dollars, but also being able to help with down payment assistance for those families. And the DPA is going to be percentage-wise over the years being given to those families should they decide to move out as some sort of intergenerational wealth that they could take with them. But a certain percentage portion will always remain with the unit, keeping that unit affordable and having DPA available to the next family that might be able to move in. So there's a semblance of perpetuity, because you heard us talking about certain construction projects after a number of years, that affordability goes away. That is not the programmatic stance of this development. So we're very excited about that and looking to see where else futuristically might we potentially be able to do something like that. You know that we have the Ypsilanti Housing Commission and we have the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. Some of our western, more rural portions of the county have talked about what potentially could the county do in the future to be able to make more affordable housing and workforce attainable housing happen on the western portion of our county. And so our Board of Commissioners had enabled us to be able to hire consultants. So we're looking into the feasibility, administration and OCED, for there to potentially be a county housing commission or potential housing authority, land trust or land fund, you know, the different mechanisms that county governments might be able to potentially use to become deeper involved in affordable housing, whether that is more so in the construction or the operations, just to what level. And it's not going to be any recommendations coming from the study, which we hope to be passing on to the Board of Commissioners before the end of the year. There will be options showing what the different options are, the feasibility, how long it might potentially take us to get that off the ground, what the cost of that might be. But the county is, you know, very aware of the fact that we need more affordable housing, and we're looking into potential options to see how we might be able to get more involved in that process.
Yeah, at the Shelter Association, similarly, as you mentioned, we anticipate this winter increased need again. So we're trying to meet those needs by expanding capacity across the county. There's been a huge push the last several years to have more capacity on the east side of the county, the Ypsilanti area. Really proud that the last several years we've teamed up with the county, thank you to the county and the city of Ypsilanti, to offer daytime and overnight sheltering options for people who live on the east side. They don't have to travel all the way to Ann Arbor. And we would love to long-term have a more permanent option out in that area. We're exploring it right now. Right now we're continuing to operate on a seasonal basis, but we really see the need for a permanent option. And then to expand capacity, but also we want to expand capacity for serving some of those subpopulations I had mentioned earlier, like folks who are struggling with chronic health conditions coming out of the hospital. We have a really powerful best practice program called recuperative care that's working with everyone here, when we get discharged from the hospital or have a condition, that we like go home and our family takes care of us and gives us our chicken noodle soup and helps us, get back on our feet. Folks who are homeless and don't have that support, sometimes are doing that on the streets, or they're doing it in the shelter, and it's just not the right capacity for that. So that's where the specialized program recuperative care comes in. That's a team up, a partnership with Michigan Medicine and Trinity Health. We want to expand that. Right now we operate it out of a hotel. It was supposed to be temporary, but now we're on like year 4 in the hotels, so we can't do that forever. But so we want to expand capacity, and then as Shonagh mentioned, we really want to continue to expand our coalition. Like I mentioned earlier, the county is incredibly supportive. Thank you to the county government again, and the city of Ann Arbor. Big thank you to them, and city of Ypsi, and many local civic groups and individuals and businesses. Washtenaw is an incredibly giving community overall, but I think using that elephant analogy, we still need a few elephants to probably fill that circle that we're making, because need's so great and because folks are really vulnerable right now and really in need, and housing prices are so high and there's so many terrible things going on in the world. So I think we want to work. It sounds pretty broad, but there are some like really grounded ways we build that coalition. We get out the word, people still don't know in the broader community there is such a need. I talk to people all the time who don't even realize Delana Center is right there in Ann Arbor, down the street from them, students, folks who work downtown, and they're shocked at how many people are homeless in our community. So I really think fundamentally we just got to keep getting the word out and building our support across the community to be able to address this issue.
Can I just mention one thing, Kathy? Okay. In addition to what everyone else has so eloquently said, I just wanted to mention that in the current federal administration, we are facing a lot of uncertainty. We are super grateful for local support. So the city of Ann Arbor's affordable housing millage has been incredibly helpful to build more housing. We have several developments in the pipeline right now to build hundreds of units of housing. The county's permanent public safety and mental health millage is really helping support a lot of the work that's happening. And then county and city general fund dollars are going into supporting a lot of these expansion projects that we are trying to do to meet the great need that we have in the county. So just wanted to mention, it's not all sunshine and roses. And we really do, I love the elephant analogy of like really trying to figure out the ways to like, how do we not just protect, but really like help folks thrive in such an uncertain environment. This earthquake that we are, experiencing on the federal level is very much rocking organizations that are doing this work. As much as we don't want to have to rely on federal funds, more than 50% of our system of care is reliant, if it's pass-through funding and somebody says it's local, it's state, it's like likely federal that's coming down through these different mechanisms. And so that's just a real concern that we also do have, but we do have these wonderful, great things going on in the community to try to meet those needs. I just wanted to mention the federal issue.
So actually, that was the next question that I was going to ask, is the impact of what's going on in Washington. I've heard people express concerns that funding for HUD is going to be cut. And of course, issues around Medicaid. We know that funding for food security programs is being and has already been cut. Would any of you like to talk a little bit about how that impact would have on housing, both in terms of the HUD cuts and the wave effect of the increased poverty through cuts to Medicaid, cuts to food programs, all those things that affect our most vulnerable residents?
So OCED is the continuum of care lead. So that's a lot of the homeless services work that we've been discussing. And it's the partners you see at this table and other partners as well in our community. And there's a lot of funding that passes through us, federal state funding, coming through the county and out into communities. So when those funding streams are lowered or cut, it impacts not only the county, it impacts all of the nonprofit agencies. In addition to that, we're the urban county lead as well. And urban county is a lot of the infrastructure dollars, construction dollars that also pass through combination federal and state. Then you're looking at, we are also the OCD is the Community Action Agency for Washtenaw County. So as an example related to Community Action Agency, just had a meeting yesterday. When you look at President Trump's 2026 budget, LIHEAP as well as CSBG are zeroed out. So that is utility type assistance, weatherization programs, ramps and things like that. So if you have like an aging home and you're trying to stay in your aging home as a senior or whatever, there's a lot of things you can't do yourself. Funding that keeps that house going, like its HVAC system, its roof, things along those lines. So keeping people housed by making their house livable. And then the CSBG is a lot of the human services programs that you hear us mentioning. And so let's look at CSBG by itself. All of the community action agencies in the state of Michigan, 27 of us, 5 of which are county run, and the rest are nonprofit organizations who run the community action agency. We are all, working together as a coalition to try and maintain that funding. But related to Washtenaw County, that's about $650,000 just from that one grant alone. So a lot of these various roles that are played at OCED, whether it's COC or Community Action Agency or Urban County or Brownfield, we also are the Brownfield Authority leads. That is all impacted, all the things we've just been talking about, the construction of affordable housing, the human services funding that goes out to nonprofits to be able to do the great work that they do, are all impacted by what's happening in the federal government. And then also the state funds us, but if the state isn't getting the funding that they need from the federal government, it limits also them what they can put out. So it's sort of a domino effect going all the way from federal to state to county and then to the nonprofit organizations.
So I can give a specific example for how it directly impacted us. Do you remember when there was that pause on all the federal grants? I think it was 2 months ago. So Upper House has a rapid rehousing program, which means that we pay the rent for families in the community for up to a year. And the goal is to get them stable, and then they take over the lease and then they're stably housed. But in the meantime, we provide case management and we're paying their rents. So we have a rapid rehousing grant. Our portion, it comes through SOS Community Services. It was $720,000. So we had 33 families out in the community at the time when all the funding was paused. And what that meant for me personally is that we were going to have to pay $50,000 in rents per month until they opened up again. And so I had to sit and try to figure out, do I spend all of our money trying to keep the families in their housing, or do we just let them go to eviction? And that was the most horrible week of my whole life, just tell you. And it makes you wonder, like, how can you go out and then apply for these grants knowing that you're going to bear the risk and it could send you under, and it could cause an eviction crisis in the community. You could cause it by saying, well, we can't afford to pay these rents anymore. It's just really, really horrible.
I think that what Shonagh just said kind of epitomizes why we're having this panel. It is about human beings. It is about real people who are who have needs. It's about children and families. And not only is there a current crisis when you talk about the number of units that are available and compare that with the need, like in the applications for the affordable housing And it is going to get worse. So what we would like to do now is take questions from the audience. And then if we have time at the end, have each of the panelists give us just real short takeaway for this group, something that they would like you to remember. And of course, we also want to make sure that folks have that website. Is it Annie? The website up there that she's setting up through the commissioners about how we can support local organizations that are being impacted.
And I've included Shelter Association, Alpha House, and SOS on the list.
So let's ask questions right now, and then we'll do the quick takeaways at the end. Theresa, do you need a little time at the end?
3 minutes.
Okay.
3-4 minutes.
Question?
Yes, as you all were speaking, I got a phone call from a gentleman who's on the verge of being homeless. He's been staying in an extended stay hotel, which is just raising his rent to where now it's double what it was a year ago. So he's about to be homeless. And what I've noticed that when the local agencies need extra spaces and buy them from the local hotels, that in some cases those hotels then evict the people who have been living there because the county will pay them a higher rate than that person was paying them. What can we do to stop that happening if you're trying to stop housing, stop homelessness, and it's causing more homelessness?
Yeah, that's a horrible situation. I'm happy to talk with you afterwards about what we can do to try to help that person. I think I mentioned earlier, we're trying to get minimize our hoteling programs, increasing shelter capacity, only using hotels when you have to. There is a time and place for them. They can support unique needs and things like that, but making sure that we have enough emergency beds so that we don't have to use them unless we absolutely have a unique situation we encounter. Like I mentioned earlier, the recuperative care program, that's 12 hotel beds that are on a quite frankly almost permanent basis taken up. That if we had a permanent facility, it'd be better in a lot of ways. It would be more cost effective and it would allow us to serve more health conditions. Right now we have to turn people away because of the hotel model. If we had a standalone, we could take in more health conditions. So there's some people who don't get help and they have to get discharged. It's just horrific the things they go through. So it's being able to minimize those hotel spaces is going to be the best way to go, I think, around that.
And I'll just add that diversion is a great opportunity to, we have a program at the Delana Center as well as one at SOS to divert folks. We are going to have less state funding, I'll just say, from that in the next fiscal year. But really, no one should be in hotel for a year. It's much more cost effective to get them into a housing and be able to pay for rent that way. So if we can divert them and pay their rent, moving forward to help them, that would be the best alternative.
And then also related to Barrier Busters, which helps provide diversionary funding to our nonprofit partners. Individuals can donate to Barrier Busters to be able to help provide funding for those in need for just these types of circumstances that we've been discussing. We also ask local government units, and not every local government unit contributes to Barrier Busters, though local government units' residents use those funds. So we'll be sending out soon to all the local government leaders a request that they also contribute to Barrier Busters to help us with diversionary funding. And mind you, some of them do, but not all of them.
Go ahead.
Hello. Okay. My question, Amanda, you mentioned a few times, is the lack of housing in Ann Arbor specifically. Everyone, I think, who's from Ann Arbor knows the most controversial debate happening in Ann Arbor right now is about the 25-year development plan in the city. I've personally lived right next to apartments and Section 8 housing my entire life, and I don't have any problems about it, probably due to that. But in the city, there seems to be a three-prong attack on development from my perspective. old-time housing owners who want to, keep the feel of the neighborhood, such as in Lubupa. You have property owners, new property owners, who own, many units, who want to keep their power and monopoly over the housing by reducing the number of units being developed. And then you have the group of people who just think that more housing intensity is bad for some reason, or that it'll have more crime or, other causes. What are your guys' opinions on the development plan, on more units being constructed, and how we can educate the public that more housing is probably good for our community, as opposed to, reducing the number of stories that can be built from 4 to 3?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I was going to bring that up. The city, not as familiar, the city of Ann Arbor is going through a comprehensive land use planning process that they've been going through for a while. I'll just say, it's not over. And there's about 6 more months before city council would vote on the land use plan. So there is opportunity to engage. And so we've just been trying to get folks out. Obviously, my organization, but also me personally, I am a former city planner, and I understand that we need more density in our communities. We have a lack of housing that's been built over the last 60 years. The university is contributing to our housing crisis because they haven't built housing for their students. And so we do need to have more housing in Ann Arbor and the surrounding areas. We have 50,000 or more students that are here each year going to school here, and we have 11,000 beds at the University of Michigan. So where do you think the other 40,000 are living? They're living in our communities. And so would love to see more students speak out in support of more housing so that they can be able to find more affordable housing. And then one thing that I'll just mention, kind of related to this, is that we at WHA is starting a program called a shared housing program for older adults. It used to be operated by Michigan Medicine's Housing Bureau for Seniors program, and it would be using existing housing stock in our community and partnering folks maybe who have a home that's too large for them right now. It doesn't make sense for them to move because of taxes and other considerations, but they have extra space in their home. And there are folks in our community who need affordable housing. And so we're going to be trying to match up households with one of the households being 55 and older as the target because of our funding. But I would love to see that grown so that we're just getting more used to intergenerational living, more households in one home. These are things around the world that, communities do, and by necessity, but also because there are benefits to intergenerational living. And I think that's something that also we need to be talking about as we're talking about the comprehensive land use plan. It's not a zoning plan. They have to be, everything has to be rezoned after the land use plan is adopted. But we really need to be thinking about, like, how do we encourage more folks in our community? We have the need. We know we have the need. We have folks commuting from, an hour plus away. We have nonprofit staff members who can't afford to live in this community, in this county. We have workers all over that can't afford to live here. So how do we create more housing in order to do that? And I think what Ann Arbor is trying to do makes a lot of sense because it's really trying to make up for the lack of housing being built over many, many decades.
We have one more question.
Okay,
I think Jeff, you had a question over there?
No, okay.
okay.
I don't have a question. I have a comment. All the activity about the people who have issues about the comprehensive land plan. I just want to say part of that is look at what we've done in affordable housing. Nothing. There's like 103 affordable housing units in Ann Arbor. That is part of the problem. There has been everything that's gone up in the last couple of years, and look around you, it's been thousands, maybe 1,000 units. None of them are affordable. So I think that there's a huge contingent of people in Ann Arbor that are saying, no, we can't continue to build a rich Ann Arbor, that this plan doesn't do anything to help anybody except the developers.
Do we have another question? I think, so I will go, whoops.
Oh, who would you like to?
So who do we have? This,
Yeah.
this young one?
Yeah.
This one?
Hi, I wanted to ask, because this is my first time hearing about this 25-year development plan. How do we get involved and learn more about this?
Yeah, so City of Ann Arbor has, it's called the comprehensive plan, comp plan. So I think if you just Google Ann Arbor, it's like they have a whole website that's dedicated to that. I will say there's a meeting, I think it's at Traverwood Library on Wednesday, the 7th, that they're going to have another active engagement session with the community about that.
Did we have another questions? You have your hand up.
Yeah, so over in Superior Township, there is an affordable housing development. But there's been so many problems. I've lived there for almost 12 years, and long before I moved in there, there's been problems with crime, there's been homicides. The landlord doesn't invest in the community. Is there a plan among all the communities to hold landlords accountable and to try to really push for having local landlords rather than these big out-of-state corporations?
Yeah, that's absolutely. The Housing Alliance really talks a lot about mission-based organizations building affordable housing, and that's how we keep it affordable and quality, and that folks, the mission-based organizations are going to reinvest in those properties. And I know the one that you're talking about, you know, we have had a group of different providers over time trying to make some headway into working with that property manager, and they've had a lot of turnover in that and staffing and whatnot. And there are just a lot of, you know, barriers to getting and helping folks in there because it's a private developer, quite frankly, and a private owner. So when we are talking about specifically my organization, when we're talking about building affordable housing, we're talking about the mission-based nonprofit organizations doing that or doing that in partnership with a for-profit developer.
One last question.
Okay.
And then.
So my opinion is that housing seems to be more of an economic issue. I know that there are other issues like substance abuse and mental health, and those are things that I'm really not that familiar with. But for the most part, for those individuals and families where they don't really run into that issue, it seems to be more of an economic issue to some extent. But my question are to those up there in the panel who are working with those families and individuals and assisting them with rent or with the purchase of a home. What types of methods or processes or reviews are you putting in place to assist those new renters or new homeowners in preparing them for the future? Because what could happen, I don't know if it has been happening, is that you know, you might have someone in a new home, you've helped them with a down payment, but what about insurance? What about repairs and maintenance? What about all of these costs that come into owning a home, or even the costs associated with renting? What types of plans or services are in place to kind of help them after that big move into that home?
So that's an excellent question, and I'll answer and then maybe hand over to Toni. But I talked about our rapid rehousing program where we find homes for families. So part of what we do, I have a specific designated staff person, the housing liaison, and their job is to be the bridge between the landlord and the resident. And part of their job is, first of all, to do the inspection and make sure the landlord and the client are on the same page. And then they also do training around, you know, you need to pay your bills on time, you need to keep it tidy, you need to take trash out. So there's the housing piece. And then we provide ongoing case management where case managers will meet initially weekly to check in and make sure that, you know, everything's going well. How's your job search going? If they have a job, how's the transport? What issues with your kids? You need childcare support, all that type of stuff. So it's very intensive in the beginning, and then we start to wean them off, and then we move down to meeting once a month. And the goal is to get ahead of any problems, like if the landlord complains, and then it's a regular thing that additional people have moved into the unit that aren't on the lease, then we had to go and intervene and say, you know, you can't do that. Let's figure out alternatives for your sister or your brother, whatever. So we're right in the middle of it with them, with the expertise and training.
And in addition to the case management services that our nonprofit providers offer to their clients, OCED also has a financial empowerment center where we have financial counselors who offer free one-on-one counseling about issues such as you mentioned, as well as other things like being underbanked, et cetera, needing to build better credit, how to set up your budget. And then later this summer, we will also be starting the opportunity to be able to help with the establishment of wills, medical directives, and things along those lines as well, where they will be directed to a site where you can prepare your own with the template that's created there. It's through a grant that we've received at OCED, and it'll be able to help them, even further with some of the financial planning and estate planning that needs to be done in a family or for an individual.
Just want to add one quick additional piece. You said it's an economic issue. I think it's also a moral issue as a society, because a lot of the people that we're dealing with is generations, and it's a systemic issue. And we have to get to the root of that problem. Like, where is our heart and our compassion, as well as figuring out the economic piece.
So, real quick, in a sentence or two, could you give this audience, you have been wonderful. I've been watching you, and everybody has been paying so much attention to this really, really important issue. So I wanted to make sure I recognize that, and thank you all for being here and caring. Then we'll turn it over to Theresa. But if each of you could give this group just a sentence or two that you want them to carry away with them.
As mentioned several times, support building more housing first and foremost. Until we get that figured out, though, continue to support basic needs as well, and innovative things like diversion, recuperative. There's a program, the city called Rising Hope. There's a lot of great innovation going on around like what we can do with less resources until we figure out our housing problem.
Ditto.
I want to get back to Kamala's speech because she gave the answer really, there's safety in numbers, and we've got to band together and we can be a powerful force.
Ditto. And then adding, our elected officials in our area are primarily Democratic. And so they support the funding that we're requesting from the federal government that then has the trickle down effect. And so, of course, letting them know your feelings of support for that, but going beyond that step, because they're Democratic and they're already in our camp, there is also the aspect of if you have friends, family members who share your values, who share your moral code about wanting to take care of those in need, then if they live in an area that is primarily Republican, and they have Republican representatives, to ask them to reach out to their Republican elected and ask them to support the same services that we've been discussing, because we need all of the votes, Democratic votes and Republican votes, to be able to get the pieces of the budget that we need passed and for legislative issues that we also need passed.
Excellent. Thank you to this wonderful, wonderful panel.
And thank you to Kathy Wyatt for putting together this wonderful, wonderful panel. Thank you all for your time. Thank you to Jim Russo, who is always humaning our sound system and Zoom, and we couldn't do it without you. I want to follow up on, both Shonagh was the first one who said moral. And everybody needs to, I was in Trader Joe's the other day, and this woman's wearing a t-shirt that said, "It's all Reagan's fault." The Reagan Revolution, right? The greed revolution. Since Reagan's election, $50 trillion has gone from the bottom 90% up to the top 1%. $50 trillion. So I just want us never to forget that. When we're all working so hard to make more crumbs, right? From the 50 trillion. What's left of the $50 trillion? This is a moral outrage. How many times have you heard, Republicans wrap themselves in Christianity and then vote down every single bill to protect other people. It is a complete moral outrage. So that's, sorry to end on such a high note, but it is an outrage and they need to be held responsible. So thank you. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for being here and thank everybody on Zoom.
Theresa and Shonagh are really right. This is a moral issue and it is about people. Too often we get wrapped up in all the scary stuff, the executive orders and the latest crazy thing when we turn on CNN and we forget. This is about people. This is about real people, real families, real children. Think about it. I always think about things in terms of the faces of the kids that are involved or the families, the people. Let's remember that in everything we do, it's about people.
Thank you. Katie from the governor's office has these postcards. See her. She's in the white t-shirt, white sweatshirt back there. And I'm sorry, what? Oh, thank you. The Michigan Resistance to call people, to call people in red areas to contact Democrats in red areas to contact their reps and check the board for other good and welfare. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.